We're going to take you on a condensed Halloween walk. We normally would do this in an hour and a half. We're going to try and squeeze it into an hour. So it's going to be a little bit of this going on as we go around this evening. I will start with a poem. Normally I start with a poem I've written this evening. I haven't written a poem, I'm sorry. I can see your disappointment. This year I've nicked one. This is called All Hallows Eve. In the ruins of the dreams and the schemes of men, when the moon begets the tide and the wide sea sighs, when a star appears in heaven and the raven cries, we will dance and revel in the devil's fete, if never more again. So, cheerfully, we're going to move over this way. I hope you enjoy this. So, for extra bonus points, I've been quite impressed by the knowledge of the people who've had on the walk over the last few days. Anyone know who that is?
It's me.
It is you. No, unless you're James the First. So this is James the First, and he's a really interesting guy because he is obsessed. He's quite the scholar, but he is obsessed with the study of witchcraft, witches, cunning folk, all that sort of thing. And he writes a wonderful book. I recommend you get it from Waterstones. It's still in print. It was a time of great religious turmoil, and Salisbury had a wonderful witch, a lady called Anne Bodiam. She was a cunning woman. She she was working with a guy called Dr. Lamb in London. She learnt her skills from him, but Dr. Lamb fell out of favour. He was accused of some very nasty things. Ask me afterwards and I'll tell you about them. But while in court he was found not guilty and then beaten to death by the crowd outside the court. So she comes down here and she falls in love with a guy, a clothier who lives down Fisherton Street, just down that way there, and she starts plying her trade as a cunning woman. And a cunning woman is the type of person you would seek out if you wanted a bit of advice, you'd lost something, you wanted to learn to read, you had a cold, or you've got to remember a cut on your finger might kill you in those days, so any kind of help would be great. Love spells, that sort of stuff. She falls foul of the Goddard family. She's accused of witchcraft. She's held prisoner, tortured a little bit. They find witch's marks or a witch's nipple on her. It's not surprising, she's 85. And then she's sentenced to death. She's taken down to the gallows gate down there where Wilton Road and Devizes Road splits. There's still a building site there now, nothing going on there. And she begs a drink from every pub on the way down Fisherton Street, which I would do if I was in that situation, to be fair. Apparently
you've heard it before. So what I'm going to say, that Wicca, that's witchcraft now, that's white witchcraft, is a 20th century invention. You might think that it's something ancient, but we've just heard the real story about what a witch was. So the Wiccan religion started with, who's up there? This man up here, who is Mr. Gerald Gardner. And he lived in the New Forest. He was also a chief druid, and he really was inspired by Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world. And it's really Aleister Crowley who invented the idea of a coven where you get 13 witches and that they all take their clothes off and dance naked under the moonlight. It's called Dancing Skyclad, but that's got more to do about Mr. Crowley's fantasies, I think.
There are some rival gangs tonight, some rival tours going around. They should have been on ours, but they've decided to do rival ones. So, if we see one, I'm going to say a word, thriller, and when I say thriller, I want you all to go, ooh, ghost, okay? So we'll just have a quick run through. Thriller. Ooh. I like that a lot. Good to me.
So, I'm going to tell you about the cemetery. It's Halloween, so we've got to talk about cemeteries, haven't we? In 1851, the cemetery here was totally overburied. The old part, which is on the other side of the church there, had actually bones coming out of the ground. If you go and look at it, you'll see it's about 3 foot higher than the soil. That's because it's densely packed with bodies. This bit behind us is just the new part of the cemetery. That's only 18th century. When they made that cemetery, they took out wagon loads of bones. Buried them under the passage which goes from St Thomas's Square to the cheese market. So there are just whole loads of bones packed under there.
Okay, you're all going to die. Sorry. So this is a very famous... How many people... I can't see very well from here. How many people have been inside this building?
Yeah.
Yes. Woo! Oh, hang on. They got to it before us. They know us.
Shall we try it? Thriller!
I think we got them back.
It does work.
It does kind of. Okay, so the great thing about this painting is it's a beautiful medieval painting. It was covered over in whitewash for some time inside St Thomas's Church here. This church is referred to as the People's Church. It was originally wooden and all that sort of stuff, but let's talk about ghosts and weird stuff. So this is the man himself here. We've got Jesus and we've got his disciples. It's all very bright and lovely. Everyone's having a great time there. It's an absolute party. But this is the devil and the ale wife, or his ale maiden, with a flagon of ale there. It's all the temptations there. So this painting is designed to amaze you with the power and the glory of God, and it's also meant to make you think, oh crikey, doesn't matter who you are, one day we're going to pop our clogs and someone's going to be judging us. And it's an amazing painting. If you've never been in there, go in there, have a look. It's practically open all the time, to be honest with you. And it's a really moving place. There's about 9 or so doom paintings in this country that we know of.
And it's really interesting because the devil around this part, Max told you about the doom painting. There's another theory about the devil around these parts. There was a pub just in Milford Street there called the Catherine Wheel. I don't know if anybody here remembers the Catherine Wheel, the old Catherine Wheel. It is now the City Lodge, I believe. And there's a legend there that was a Cavalier's stronghold. And on one particular night, there was a Cavalier, a young man called Joshua, who was blaspheming, and one of the older Cavaliers said, Joshua, I will stop now. I will stop blaspheming. If you carry on, the devil himself will surely come and take you. And Joshua said, let him come, I don't care if he comes. If he comes here now, I'll pull his ears and I'll pull his beard. And all of a sudden there was a huge great explosion, a rancid smell, and this dark demon man grabbed hold of Joshua and flew out through the window. This is an old Salisbury legend, and it goes...
The story I want to tell you is about Lady Florence Wyndham. If you walk into Salisbury Cathedral, one of the first tombs you'll see is of Sir Thomas Wyndham, and it's a very classical tomb. And the lady who is standing above it, very classical figure, is missing a finger. And it's not a finger that's been broken off, she was sculpted like that. They'd only been married a year when she suddenly died. And her husband was absolutely distraught. So he laid her out in her bridal gown with all her jewellery on, and she was laid out in her coffin in the church. That night, the sexton broke into the coffin and stole her jewellery, but he couldn't get the ring off her finger, so he took out a knife and chopped it off. Whereupon she woke up and screamed with pain, with blood spouting out, because she wasn't dead at all, she was only in a coma. So, this building on the corner of Crane Street here was built as a 15th century merchant's house, and Henry VIII even stayed there with Anne Boleyn, because they couldn't stay in Salisbury Close, they'd fallen out with the church. But for over 200 years of its history, it was the workhouse. It was a place to strike fear into the population of Salisbury. Because if you went to the workhouse, you had to wear a uniform, you weren't allowed out, you were separated from your family. There were men one side, women the other, children the other. They didn't actually do much work in this particular workhouse. They did start a mill, but because they had to have overseers, people training, that cost too much money, and the actual workers were transient, So they soon closed it down.
It surrounds this charming looking girl here, little girl here. Very beautiful girl, I'm sure you'll all agree on with that. Perhaps not. She was Lydia Hewlett. As I say, she was living at a place called Down Barn Buildings in Coombe Bissett. The interesting thing about this little girl was that she'd seen a gypsy woman stealing onions, and the gypsy woman looked at Lydia and put a curse on her. And just a few months later, the gypsy lady died. But then Lydia here started hearing what is described as rappings, and lots of them. Now, this intrigued the Salisbury press, particularly the Salisbury Journal, and the editor went to the cottage to see if he could hear or listen to see the rappings for himself, so he could write the editorial in that paper. And he heard them, on a frequent, like that, all the time. However, as the rappings went on, Lydia became more and more poorly and ended up behind us here in what was the old general infirmary, ended up there. The rappings then started being heard in the hospital and not in the house where she was. When she was well enough, she left the hospital, went back home again, fell down the stairs, severely damaging her back, ends up back in the infirmary again, where the rappings are all heard by the consultants, by the surgeons. It's a really very strange story.
I really enjoyed this evening's talk. It's very good. It's worth every penny. So if you ever get the chance to go, really go, because you really do learn something. Thank you very much.
Can I just say what an absolutely excellent tour. Very interesting, very informative, absolutely fantastic. Thoroughly recommend it to anybody who wants to come and watch it any time. Just come along. You'll make the most of it. You really enjoy it.
We've just finished the time zone walk. We've been on this walk a few times over the past few years, haven't we?
Yeah.
Every year it gets better and better. New stories every time. Lovely learning a little bit more about the history of the city we live in, and we walk through every single day and you just don't realise. But yeah, fantastic job by Matt, Ruby and Frog. Definitely recommend it for next year.
Come on.